restart the meeting and reconvene the meeting. And I want everybody to have an opportunity to speak during this public comment period. Can I see a show of hands about how many people haven't gotten to speak? Okay, so we're going to limit, if possible, shoot for about three minutes. Of course, if you need more time, then please, I don't want to prevent anybody from saying something that they need to say. And I also would ask that we're prudent in our follow-up questions, so that, you know, if you have a follow-up question, it absolutely needs to be asked, but let's think about time as well. So you're standing up and raised your hand. Would you like to go next for public comment? Just because you happen to be standing.
Because I can't sit. Okay. I'm Sarah Owen. I'm the Wetland Mapping Coordinator for the Montana Natural Heritage Program, so thank you for allowing me to comment. I guess the first thing I want to say is I don't necessarily represent my colleagues, but I know that we all feel a lot of the same way in that this process has been accelerated over what we were originally told back when we first had a staff meeting in August. And that was that the decision was going to be made in April of 2020. That was what we were first told. So at that time we thought, okay, we've got a good 8 or 9 months to really wrap our heads around this entire process. And then I believe it was in the October meeting when we were told that the decision or recommendation would hopefully be made today. And so that kind of caught us off guard, and we sort of scrambled to try to understand how this is all going to impact us. And I think, at least for me, and I know everybody else, we feel that we still don't have all the answers that we would like to have, and we don't have the depth of answers that we would like to have. So I think our main goal for today, or at least my main goal, is to ask you to please take into consideration all of our comments and requests, and to not make a final vote today, but to push it back perhaps until the next meeting. I know you've thanked us for being here and providing comments, and it would be a really good faith effort for us if we were actually heard, and so I think that's probably the most important thing you're probably going to hear from all of us today.
Did you feel like you didn't have the opportunity to be heard during the process?
No.
Was that not given to you?
No, I think we have.
You have.
I think we felt that we have been allowed to provide comments and ask questions. We've definitely had that opportunity.
Good.
Some of us have questioned, well, does it even matter? Has the decision already been made? And we keep telling ourselves, those of us that have had these little conversations, that even if it doesn't matter, we're going to tell ourselves that it does matter, because nobody else is going to stand up for us if we have questions or concerns, or even if we support everything. We want our voice to be heard, and so we're going to go ahead and try to make our voice be heard. So that's, I think, the main thing you'll hear from the rest of the group. I do want to address the question, Aaron, that you proposed earlier about staff using tuition waivers. And I personally have done that in the past. I took a class with Helena College to use Microsoft Access, and I know Braden might be going, "You did?" Because you asked me all these questions all the time. That was 6 years ago, and I haven't used it a lot since then, so I probably need a little refresher course. But for my wetland mappers, and I have 11 or 12 wetland mappers that are working with me right now, almost all of them are young professionals. They're in their mid to late 20s, some of them are in their early 30s, and they would like to have the opportunity to take classes for either professional development or personal development, and that tuition waiver means a tremendous amount to them. It's something that they wouldn't be able to take a college course just on their own, because, you know, a 3-credit course is something like $1,000 maybe by the time you add in all the fees and everything. So to have that tuition waiver knock several $100s off of a course like that really does mean something for them. And so they have actually told me this week that that is something they would really like to look into. So, and I believe that's all I have to say. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I have just a small comment or question.
Sure.
So in the materials that we received, there were pages of staff questions and some responses, and at the very tail end of that, there was a section that were of sort of unanswered staff questions because it wasn't clear to staff what the question was. But I would encourage you to work with your supervisor and state library staff to get all of those questions addressed, so that so there are no more unanswered questions, because I'm with you. I mean, we all want to know what's going on, right?
Right. Yes,
So
we do.
I hope that process continues forward, because everyone needs everyone on the same page.
I think,
Even
yeah,
if we don't agree about the contents of the
exactly.
page, but let's get everyone on the same page.
If we have the answers, then at least we have an ability to make informed decision, and yeah, I think
And
that will help.
the other thing that strikes me is that there's at the partners meeting, I thought I saw like 60 or 80 wetland mappers.
There were, we've multiplied and then we've retracted.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Well, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Just to let you know, you do have someone online that wants to talk.
Oh, great. We do have someone online who would like to offer public comment. Can we
It's Linda.
just, oh, great. To switch things around, let's hear
From Linda.
Dr. Vance? Okay. Please, Dr. Vance, if you would like to provide public comment, we would love to hear from you.
Just don't touch anything.
I'm thinking about
Mm-hmm.
Shall I grab him? Nicole? I
Yeah.
can do Nicole really good.
Hold it.
I had older brothers.
Is there technical issues, or do you think she's simply not there?
She's on the phone. She says she thinks she's muted, but I'm not showing her as muted.
Oh,
I'm
so
going to unmute
you're in communication.
everybody. I'm going to unmute everybody and then let her talk, and then we'll remute. It's the only way I know to do it.
You're gonna what me, everybody?
Oh, she is showing muted on here.
Okay.
Can you unmute her?
I'm going to have to unmute everyone.
Can we have
Am
another?
I unmuted?
Oh, there
There
you
we
go.
go.
Here we go. We can hear you.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
You are.
Good. Okay, so my name is Linda Vance, and I'm the senior ecologist for the Montana Natural Heritage Program, and I'm currently managing 15 or so full-time staff and over 20 projects with a dollar value in excess of $2 million, in 2020 alone. My partners, the ecology program's partners, include both state and federal agencies in Montana, as well as universities, nonprofits, private entities, and the regional and national offices of federal governments, notably the BLM. And I really want to preface my remarks by saying that as a Montanan, I am incredibly proud of our state library. It has always been to me a model for 21st century libraries. And whenever I get a chance to brag about the scope and quality of its information services, I do that. And I say that because I have a lot of concerns about this proposal. I'm going to leave it to others to address the important issue of scientific credibility and autonomy, but I want to tell you that's always forefront in my mind. But right now, what I want to address, what I see as some incorrect assumptions underlying this proposal that I think are the consequence of moving forward too quickly and moving forward on a single alternative. I want to reiterate that I'm saying this because I would hate to see the library fail. I really love the library, and I love the Montana Natural Heritage Program. So I want to say that the first assumption that troubles me is an assumption that all the projects with their associated funding can be moved from the university to the library so that indirect can be used to support the new infrastructure that would be required. What the study doesn't seem to have investigated is the structure of all this project money. Let me explain to you a bit what goes into this. In 2018, several university-based heritage programs, along with private consultants and nonprofits, joined forces to bid on a suite of regionally based indefinite duration, indefinite quantity contracts issued by the BLM. And we were successful beyond our largest dreams. And now the University of Montana and MTNHP are part of contracts that cover both terrestrial and aquatic monitoring for the BLM in the Pacific Northwest and the Central Rocky Mountain states. But because of the contract structure, we, the University of Montana and Montana Natural Heritage Program, we are not the prime contract holders on any of the Pacific Northwest contracts or on the Central Terrestrial contract. And what that means is that any task order request that comes out is received by one of our 3 prime contracting partners, who then decides which approved partner will bid. So the award is received by the prime, and a subaward goes to the bidding partner. So for example, this year, we have $1.4 million for monitoring under the Pacific Northwest contract. It's all pursuant to subawards from Oregon State and Portland State. Now, those subawards end December 31st of 2020. If the program moves to the library, it would be entirely up to those universities to accept a library-based MTNHP as a task order partner so that we could bid on future task orders. And because these are firm fixed-price task orders, there's no room for error, and the prime is always on the hook for completion. So the very first hurdle with a lot of this money that we have as project money would be to convince the prime contractors that the library support for field data collection in other states would be equal to or superior to the universities. And then the second hurdle would be for the prime contractors to convince the BLM to approve the subcontractor substitution. And you may think that this would be a slam dunk, but when I recently asked the BLM to include just a small role for the Alaska Natural Heritage Program in the task orders, their response was that no new entities could be added before the next IDIQ comes out in 4 years, because all contractees and proposed subcontractors have to be vetted in open competition. There's a related assumption that all the ecology contracts are revenue producers, and this is also not always the case. So for example, we're prime contractors for an IDIQ for aquatic monitoring in the central states. This year, among other task orders, we have a $260,000 task order for aquatic monitoring in Utah, but it's a pass-through. It's always been understood by us in the BLM that the Utah work belongs to the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. The University of Montana gets $6,500 in overhead for administering that contract, which includes setting up the subaward, monitoring the spending and performance, and submitting all the invoices to the BLM. That $6,500 does not cover costs, and the only reason the university does it is because it's part of this complicated contracting setup we have, and because the processes for inter-university transfers, although they're cumbersome, are well established. For me, this is a critically important contract. These are my partners. If this contract could not be assumed or would not be assumed by the library because it's not a moneymaker, then I would be letting down an entity that I've worked with for about 15 years now. There's another implicit assumption, which is that the library could easily handle the BLM mapping contracts, whether they're in-state or out-of-state. Now, these are also IDIQs held by the University of Montana. And I think we could easily make out the case that a library-based MTNHP could execute this work every bit as well as a university-based program, but that's not the case. In addition to the volumes of certifications and assurances that the library would have to submit to the BLM to be approved as a contractor, we would have to demonstrate technical expertise. And one of the things that all the mapping task orders require is that before the heads-up mapping, the project area gets initially mapped with object-oriented classification. Now, I'm not even going to try and bore you with what it means. Some people in the room understand, but I can tell you that no library-based NHP staff have that expertise. And moreover, we don't even have the expensive software required to do it. That's why Jessica Mitchell and I are both listed on all the mapping contracts as key personnel. And it's really critical there be no impediment to our collaboration, or that it not rest on a yet-to-be negotiated memorandum of understanding. When I look at this proposal, I see that so much has not yet been worked out. There's an assumption that a deal can be worked out with the university at some future point. I have 5 staff sitting in the university in Jessica Mitchell's lab. I need them to continue sitting there. So as a project manager with responsibility for so many people and so much money, I have just got to say that this proposal is too vague on too many questions for me to be comfortable with it. From my perspective, I feel that too many potential problems have been deferred to a later date, like the memorandum of understanding with the university, or just not fully investigated. Like each and every contract has something funky about it that hasn't really been looked into. How would it move? What would it take? who would have to agree? What would be lost? What would be the risk? And I have to say, too, that as put forward, this proposal really doesn't offer any tangible benefits for the ecology program or for the ecology program's federal or state partners. I mean, Bryce has been reiterating he wants to see tangible benefits come out of any move, and I feel the exact same way. There's no problem for us right now that needs to be fixed. We've managed to stay on top of the ecology core work for a decade of reduced funding, and indeed we've really thrived. So for us, there's no guarantee that we'd be trading our scientific credibility and our autonomy from the university for a more secure future with the library. Because if you look carefully at this study report, at the time of the proposed transfer in January 2021, there's still no core funding for anyone at all in the ecology program. There are the assumptions about some future MOU that would allow staff in Missoula to continue to work from the SAL and for Jessica to continue to collaborate with us, but there's no certainty that would happen, and there's no consideration of consequent costs if the university demands increased overhead for the contracts run through the lab. So from my perspective, as a program manager and a project manager, this proposal addresses one set of problems, which by creating others, and those other problems fall disproportionately on the ecology program. So I want to say, I hope that you defer action today, that going forward, my clear preference is that the program stays with the university, or that at least we investigate other alternatives to address the core funding issues. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no questions for Dr. Vance, then would someone else like to come up and speak?
I'm on the end, so.
You're
My name is Karen Coleman. I am the Biological Data Systems Coordinator here at the Montana Natural Heritage Program. And I'll try to be brief. I don't have a lot of detail to add, but I do want to say clearly that I do not support a decision to transfer administration of the Heritage Program to the library at this time. I think it may be the right decision in the long run. I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of questions still unanswered. And let's see, I have all these notes, so I think I don't need to say too many details about those. A couple things I wanted to add is, for one thing, I worked here in 2005 when we transferred from the Nature Conservancy to the University of Montana. And at that time, we had a much more extensive process of involving partners and doing surveys with partners and getting feedback. And I think that process lasted for probably the better part of a year or maybe more. I can't remember exactly how long it went on, but we're a complex program, and it takes a lot of time to work through these issues and figure all of these questions out. And I also want to say, just for the record, in case anyone is wondering, I have announced my resignation from the program, and our decision is marginal. I want to say it is not because of this process. That is not a reason for my departure, but it is about funding issues and the overall stress of dealing with everything that we have had to deal with in the last couple of years. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make that clear to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry that you are resigning. I understand it's been a tough couple of years, but thank you for your years and years of fabulous service.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I'll add that we did do back, what year did you say we switched over? 2004?
2006, it was July 1st, 2006 when we actually entered the university university, so it was at least a year before that we started studying.
That you started studying it. So you gave it at least a year to study.
I think so.
That,
yeah. I mean, we could look up. You know, we
yeah,
have
that's
notes from that time. We could look it up. But that's my recollection is that it went on for at least a year. That's
really interesting history, and I appreciate you bringing that up. You know, we did go back and look at that study, and it was quite extensive, and it was the TNC and the state library worked together to do that study. And I will let the commissioners know that one of the statements that came from that study was that stakeholder input did not provide clear direction about which institution should assume administrative responsibility for the NHP. Now, having said that, stakeholder input was extremely valuable in many, many ways, but there was no decisive input about which direction we should take. That the opinions at that time were as varied as the opinions today in the study that we're currently doing. And if you want to read the whole study from the last time the program changed hands, we can make that available.
I would like to see that, please.
Okay.
We'll post that in the record.
Okay. We'll get that out to you.
Yeah, so I'm Dan Bach. I'm the senior zoologist, so I head up our small zoology program. It's myself and one other staff member. Just for some perspective, in actuality, we drive about 8% of our operating budget for funds. I do want to make the point, though, that doesn't mean that we're not necessarily doing core work. And just to kind of speak to the color coding on that thing, I wouldn't want anybody to get the impression that some of the areas that we're falling behind in are necessarily as important as what we're currently allocating resources to. For instance, I would love to be able to rank and have good data on some of our invertebrates. I think that's just probably me, though. I don't think our partners really, value that as highly as focusing on species of conservation concern, particularly vertebrates, those that have special management designations. So I don't think it's a one-to-one there. Some of the red squares are pretty small. There should be. Some of the green squares are pretty big. But I do also want to say that one of my concerns for long-term within the program is that, with our loss of core funding, we're going to become increasingly reliant on projects. Right now, those largely align with what I see as the needs. Again, we're not going after competitive grants. Almost all of my money comes in as cooperative agreements. That's working with our state and federal partners to identify what their needs are, and more importantly, for me to identify what my needs are or what the program needs are. So I think through that process, those goals actually align. However, if something changes in the future, and I start having to go after smaller pots of money that maybe aren't as efficient meeting those goals, I can see that as an issue. So I really want to say that I appreciate everybody considering how best to fund that. Also made a note, I do think that, staff I do appreciate being, having meetings, getting to ask questions, and seeing that spreadsheet that's immensely helpful. I actually was able to look at what the benefits would change based on that last night. That does bring up one point that's been created by a number of other folks. I was able to pass on the proposal yesterday morning to those state and federal folks that I work most closely with. I did receive some feedback. It was largely that, holy cow, we need more time to digest this. I'm not saying anything new here. We'll also point out that at least in one case, the guy I sent it to wasn't in the office till next week, so he hasn't seen it yet. So, that does, I guess, kind of getting back to how my program's funded. One thing that I would hate to see is us make a change, and then to figure out, kind of like Linda's talking about, like, well, the BLM would love to continue funding this program, but we can't change our contract in the time frame that allows you to do the work that you promised to do. We would money stay on the table. It gets messy. So I think first and foremost, that's my biggest concern is I think it's great that the libraries looked at on their end. They do have the ability to do these contracts, but I really feel like it's incumbent upon us to get feedback from the folks that overwhelmingly fund my program and make sure that they're on board with it and that they don't have any potential issues. That's the biggest thing. I do think that, I don't want to get in the weeds because I know it's 1 o'clock, but there are a handful of things to consider. One of the biggest changes for us will be that right now, for better or worse, I don't receive overtime, I don't receive comp time. Both myself and Alexis are salaried employees. That means when we go out and are in the middle of eastern Montana, the truck doing something with critters, we can work for 16 hours a day if we need to, and work for 7 hours a day if we need to. What this means when we switch, if and when we switch over to the state, we start earning comp time. I'm classified the way I would be classified. I'd earn a 1-to-1 ratio. Alexis might be earning 1.5 hours of comp time per hour worked. So what that can mean is that right now, if we have a project that requires us to be in the field for, let's say, 2 months, but we work 12 hours a day, we're essentially working, or 3 months, we're working 12 hours a day, we're accumulating 4 hours of comp time per 8 hours worked. In order to adjust that and to get to the library desired level of 40 hours, that's going to be tough. What will end up happening is that we'll have about 2 months worth of comp time that we can use or not. I'm not going to use it. I took a month off when my kid was born. I'm still catching up for that. I can't imagine trying to burn my comp time and still maintain our program, but I think it's worth considering because if we do stick to the 8-hour or try not to let our comp time get away, that does mean that our value goes down. Like our partners will have to spend more money to get us to do the same work. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, a good work-life balance is imperative. I'm just saying that's something that we'll have to consider, and we should. And again, I'm not necessarily decision. I think it's worth considering, how that impacts. The other thing was one minor note is pro cards. Right now, the university's happy to give us a pro card. I don't make as extensive use of it as some of the other programs do, but it's still nice to have that for emergencies. My understanding
Pro card.
Oh, sorry.
It's like a
Credit card that goes to an account for the university or the state. Basically, if I need to make a purchase for something we're doing, like we have equipment failure in the field, I can do that. If I don't have that, that usually comes out of my pocket. And then I have to get reimbursed, make sure that comes through the credit card statements. So I'm largely all right with doing that in some cases for myself, but it's just one of those things. If there was a need for any of my staff to have those, and they came up with those, I think it's unreasonable to ask for folks who are working. They have to spend their own money and then be expected to reimburse that. So I think that's not necessarily, again, something to hold this up. These are minor details, stuff in the weeds, but these are like the kind of little details that we need to consider. If there is a transition, it'll be different. I can see some positive, tangible benefits. I can also see some negatives to administration by both the library directly and also the university. So, got a bunch of scroll notes here. I think I covered everything. So, if anybody has any questions now or later, feel free to call me up and ask.
I do like to thank you for the work you do, and I note particularly that I appreciate the fact that field work doesn't fit into 8 hours. However, as a commissioner,
yeah.
I am both kind of legally and worse yet morally precluded from ripping you off and basically paying you half of the hours that you work for.
Sure.
So is the university.
And you guys are too valuable to screw over.
Yeah, and I don't want to make that sound like I'm complaining that I'm not getting paid for half my work. But the reality of this is, like, if I'm out, 20 miles outside of Glendive, and I have the option of either doing something productive or sitting on a chair in the sun staring at my thumbs, I'd rather be doing the work. I don't work more hours than I need to because I feel obligated to. I do it because I love the work and it doesn't feel like work.
I get that. I get that totally.
Yeah. And I mean, I should say also that this applies to myself and Alexis. When we hire temporary employees, we very much stress that they should and do stick to a 40-hour work week. So, it's complicated, but I guess.
But you guys should be fairly paid for the work you do.
Yeah, and I believe we are under our currents. And
It's
I,
good
I
work,
speak
too.
for myself.
It's good work.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
But just as an idea of like some of how the minor details could scale up to major changes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
My name is Katie Jick. I'm an ecology project manager in the Heritage Program. I did write some written comments for you. With the amount of time that I have, I'm going to kind of skim over this because I have a couple comments about just sort of the general things that I've heard today too. But I wanted to start by saying that I have only worked for Montana Natural Heritage Program since January. But in 20 years of working in conservation and ecological research throughout the country, I've interacted with heritage programs quite a bit. First in Delaware, then New York, now in Montana. I've had the opportunity to work with and interact with other heritage programs that we collaborate closely with in Montana now. And I want to say that my perspective is I have a ton of respect for these programs. I have a ton of respect for the folks that work in these programs. I have for 20 years. So my comments are not just about the last few months that I've been working here. It's about wanting this program to continue to be successful well into the future. I'm personally and professionally invested in this. So my comments, I just had 2 comments, and I please ask you to read these. I'm not going to go into detail. It's just about what affects me at work. The first thing had to do with our communication with the partners and their opportunity to have time to digest this information and comment. We've talked about that a bunch today, so I'm not going to go into it. The second part is just about how I think that both the library and the university have an impact on our program and also on my ability to do my job. So if we think about the library, absolutely, it makes a lot of sense, even though it's not a common association with heritage programs. Libraries curate data and make that available to the public, curate information. It makes a lot of sense, and obviously we belong as part of the library. The piece of my job that I do is that I acquire primary data, primary information. I do the science. And I think the university's role in that is really key. Universities have a lot of experience conducting the business of science. University of Montana impacts my ability to do my job by providing the resources that I need to conduct science, especially by providing a community of scientists that we collectively have some credibility because of all the great work that goes on at UM. I've worked as a postdoc for 3 years in the biology department prior to this position. I individually worked with folks that are internationally recognized. That credibility makes a big difference for me and my program, my ability to do my job. Part of that has to do with, I understand these funding issues. I understand where all of this is coming from, definitely. But I also think that the core funding that we're talking about in the past and in the future potentially is hypothetical and somewhat shaky, and these things ebb and flow. I keep hearing about people cuts that they're still recovering from. The reason my association with the university is important is because this ability to acquire soft money is always going to be a part of this program. And maybe sometimes it's less important, but at some time in the future it might be very important. My association with the university gives me the ability to basically apply for very diverse sets of funding. They give me some flexibility, not just what I would be able to do with being able to say I'm with the Heritage Program and I'm with the State Library, but I also have this third card to play for whatever audience that I'm addressing. And that credibility that the university provides, and also this sort of business support. They speak my language. They know what I need as a scientist in order to successfully conduct projects. Those things are really important to me. And I also just wanted to quickly say that observing this meeting, this is the first time I've ever been to something like this before. There's a couple things that stand out to me. One is that we keep talking about communication, and that we all, there seems to be a cool hand Luke style lack of communication here, right? I think we can all do better at that. I think we can do better communicating with our partners and with each other, and I just had a couple suggestions regarding that. One idea for communicating more effectively with our partners would be to offer some sort of survey. And there are ways to conduct surveys so that we actually do get fruitful information from people. Obviously, we need to give them written information, enough time to digest that, some reminders to reply, and then a period, a deadline for reply, so that it's all very clearly written out for people so that they can understand everything. I've spent a lot of time in front of the classroom. I think the reason that your professor, you can imagine, was always bugging you to do the reading before you came to class was because that professor knows that they don't have to start from zero at the beginning of a 40-minute period. It's the same idea. We just want to give people information that they can actually digest before they can give you thoughtful feedback. So some sort of survey, some sort of personal interaction with our partners, I think would be professional courtesy. The second thing is, I do feel like Jenny has had several conversations with me about this and definitely listened to what I've had to say. I haven't gone into details about, like Dan mentioned, the leads, these things like purchasing, hiring, communication, all of those things that the university provide are really important to me, and I'm happy to individually talk to you about that, but I have talked to Jenny about those things. Jenny, I feel like one thing I just have to say about my interactions with you is they've all been really productive, collegial. I've enjoyed our conversations. I've probably not been as direct with you as I think in an ideal world I could have been. So I can't speak for anyone else, but it sounds to me like there's a lot of this sort of like we're playing the game of telephone thing going on. One of those reasons, I think for me, not necessarily, I can't speak for staff because I haven't had a conversation with anyone else about this, but for me, you asked who's Bryce's supervisor. My supervisor is Linda Vance, but if you ask me who's steering the ship, Jenny's my big boss, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to acknowledge that there's a power dynamic there. So if I'm tentative to be very direct with you, I think that's why, and it doesn't say anything about you personally or our professional relationship. It's just something that does exist. So I don't know. I think a lot of people need to put their heads together to figure out how to better communication between staff, maybe heritage staff, library staff, and the commission. One idea I had today was just that I recently attended a meeting where the organizers hired a third-party facilitator. And I think it would really help with communication among a lot of people. And I know that costs money, but it seemed very effective to me. It was the first time I had attended a meeting where there was somebody with no skin in the game to direct the conversation. And I think we got a lot of really good information out of that, and it was really productive. So if there, it's just an idea, considerations. I'm actually I appreciate you taking these comments. I'm gonna write some more detailed comments and email them to you too, just about the kind of details of my work life. But two more things. Sorry, this is more than 3 minutes. The first thing has to do with any concern that I have regarding an administrative change where an administrative hurdle or rule is placed on how I do my job, takes time away from my ability to do project management. It takes time away from my ability to do leading my team, basically. Those two things are vital for me to deliver really high quality products to our partners. I need to have time for management and leadership. Any administrative hurdles that are going to take time from my job are going to limit my ability to do that, and then also limit my ability to, in the future, show that I can do this work well and get more funding to do it. And lastly, I just want to say, I haven't been here that long. Everyone that I've interacted with on the staff is talented, tremendously dedicated to the work they do. People might wonder, why would we want a job where we have to partially fund our own salaries or fully fund our own salaries? You could come up with a lot of answers for that. I have to say that regarding our staff and myself personally, it's just passion for the work that we do. So please, any decision that you make, and I would, again, just want to directly say, encourage you to not decide today, but to take some time to further the study. Please consider that our role in this is that we all really want to do a great job at the job that we do, and it's clear to me that you also are invested in that. So just want to thank you for the opportunity to comment.
I really appreciate you as a new employee coming in and sharing that and sharing your perspective. And I mean, I would like to follow up with anybody who wants to follow up, but I'd really like to follow up with you personally so that you kind of have full disclosure about how this process has happened. You know, it seems like you have been perhaps left out of a lot of it, and I'm not sure how that happened, but not just for the sake of backing up, for the sake of going forward, so that you're always comfortable, you know, getting this kind of stuff to us so that we can review it and really get into it at meetings and that kind of stuff.
I don't feel that I personally was left out. Jenny had a half-hour meeting slotted for me, and I believe it was for over an hour.
Great.
But I'm just saying that after that point, I think we could do better with sort of, you can ask me, if it's okay for me to say, you can ask me directly from now on whether or not I support the decisions that you're making. Having said that, I understand that I'm an employee and will follow along.
I appreciate your positive comments. That was very welcome, and especially directed towards Jenny, who's been kind of beat up today.
And this is not meant to be. I think you used the word earlier today that some of these were
testy.
This is not meant to be testy. I don't know what my tone is in it, but
I think your tone was probably positive.
Okay.
Because you seem like that kind of person.
This illustrates again what a great staff we have.
It does.
We do have a great staff. Yeah. Next. Sorry, it's your job.
Where's your Cordy?
Well, I'm trying to remember who all.
Hi, I'm Braden Burkholder. I'm a data analyst for National Heritage Programs. I work in information services. I have some comments here today that I'm going to let you read most of these. I'm not going to read them to you because I want to respect your time. But I will just briefly reiterate that I think the vast majority of staff really would appreciate, especially our partners, having more time to be able to digest the materials that they've been allowed to see so far, and to be able to offer some meaningful feedback, because they might have really important things that could impact the positive direction of this company. One thing that I would really hope we can be able to see is some transparency in terms of assessment of the outlook of the budget of the Heritage Program. We have a very complicated budget, and I'm honestly not the best person to speak to this. But it's very variable. It transitions a lot through time. We have really periods of high project dollars, periods of low project dollars, and it would be, I think, invaluable for staff that are within the program to deal with a lot of those budgets, whether they're program managers or part of our administrative staff, to be able to see those numbers and say, hey, wait a second, this one doesn't make sense to us. Why did you use this number? And it has nothing to do to say that your analysis isn't correct, Melissa. But I fear that there may be pieces that could be overly optimistic and through no intention whatsoever, but there might be missing pieces in there. And to this point, to my knowledge, there has been no transparency there in terms of how those calculations have come about to suggest that the program is going to have a really positive direction in the library. I would also like to see, it's been mentioned a couple times, to be able to have pretty clear options of what transition might occur if one does from the university to the state library, and if it is a portion of the program, what are the advantages of that versus the whole program. The current proposals to leave the spatial analyst lab behind as part of, at least the director is part of the University of Montana. We've heard concerns about that as well, but that's just one option of many, and it'd be great to see a full analysis of why options work or don't work, or what their positives and negatives are. I think having that information laid out in a really straightforward manner helps you as a commission make a decision, and to have all the information you need at your fingertips in a way that's really easily digestible. And so on that note, I just want to state for the record that I'm not opposed to the MSL administrating the program. I think they can be very successful in doing so. But the process as it's proceeded so far has left a lot of open questions in the mind of many staff, And in particular, in answering to our partners, it's difficult to tell them, here are the tangible benefits of what we're going to get out of this in terms of these are the advantages of moving to library. And so having that more clearly laid out gives us the ability to go to our partners and say, okay, this is why this move makes sense. And it also allows for staff complete buy-in to the process and to the transition. So I hope that you can take those comments into consideration. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any commenters remaining? One more, please.
Jessica Mitchell, I'm the Spatial Analysis Lab Director, so I sit over at the university and definitely had many conversations with Jenny about concerns and just how complicated of a decision it is with the lab. I think if you look at the timeline of the proposal, it's a little bit simpler to understand how informatics can transfer in as you move, almost across a sliding scale into ecology, where the sheer number of people and the breadth of the projects change, that the details of working on a transition become more complicated. And when you kind of reach, I think, the end of that spectrum, there's the spatial analysis lab that is really over the past little over a year now that Bryce and I worked together. We've really spent a lot of time trying to truly bridge a gap between research that is going on at the university, for example, reaching out to the state climate office, the state climatologist, for example, leads the climate MSGI there. So there's a lot of work that goes on the ground with even integrating some of the thematic areas. The lab itself stewards the land. And so there's this core part of the lab. There's contract dollars that we have with federal and state agencies such as Fish and Wildlife Park, BLM, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have some object-based image analysis techniques with wetland mapping, so we provide some technical support on the end of heritage programming mapping efforts as well. So I guess all of that said, there was, I think, a proposed decision to have me remain on the university side of things. And I think really my concern is that no matter what direction we go, some sort of change, the lab is no longer that perfect bridge between things that are going on the core level and for the land management end of things. And on the research side of things, I would love for the lab to remain in the business of supporting the core mission of the heritage program and plant cover. I think there's a lot of interaction at the state level with this library for providing support for the LIDAR repository that it's building would be another example. And I think between the university and the library, there's a huge benefit win-win situation with the cyber infrastructure of high performance data computing that the university would be able to provide to the library. How do we go about transferring large amounts of LIDAR data back into the state and delivering quickly to users who may be in and so those are some IT issues that folks on campus are on the forefront of addressing under NSF grants. And so I do want to remain that lab that is truly in the middle. My concern is that if I, under this transition, end up on more one side than the other, the project dollars and vehicles for the flow of those sorts of funding get cut off to the point where the lab may not be able to operate. There's, I think, a lot of operational details that need to get worked out. And ultimately, that feeds back to the long-term sustainability of the heritage program under the library. If we don't have those continued project dollars feeding back to the program, what does that look like under a long-term financial scenario? I can see the funding levels that we have right now, and that's sustaining a transition, but what gets broken along the way, if you're pouring water in the gas tank, are we still going to run in 5 years with diluted project dollars if some pathways get so those are my concerns at this point. Thank you for the time to speak.
Thank you. Thank you.
Quick follow-up for Jessica.
Sure.
Linda had mentioned the she referred to the e-cognition. That's what we used to use. Is that software license? Or is it quite expensive?
It's one of the more expensive softwares, and at this point we're using it for developing workflows. And there's a number of software licenses that are pretty specific to image processing, NV and their modules, and Airbus being other ones. That we certainly benefit from working with the Terradynamics group in the College of Forestry and all of their licensing and IT support there.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you for reminding us that there's a necessary partnership between the program and the youth system.
All right. I think that's the last of the commenters. So at this,
may I have a chance to
please
to share some thoughts as well? I really appreciate all of you being here. You know, it reflects, I think, what was the good communication that we had going forward. We were never going to reach consensus on this decision, and I don't think that was ever the goal. I think that was clear very, very early on. To the point about wanting to see multiple options, we've been very clear all along that we've anticipated that what would come of this study would likely be a hybrid model. That's what we've recommended. We heard from staff saying that the program could be split, that information services could be a natural program from the library. I recall having that conversation with Scott back in October. We've talked about perhaps bringing zoology and botany in, but leaving the ecology program. Last week when Bryce and I were talking about the timeline, he suggested that we could bring in zoology in May and wait on botany. On Monday, he told me that perhaps ecology could wait until 2022 or even longer. At some point, we have to make a decision as leaders, and it's my job to bring a recommendation to the commission, and that's what I've done. And if you have questions that are left unanswered, please ask them, but please ask them in concise ways so that I can provide you meaningful input that will help reach a decision. To the question of a memorandum of agreement on the spatial analysis lab and the university, there's no way I could provide that kind of detail at this point because I don't have direction from the commission to act on this proposal or not. I've had conversations with Scott last week about what potential models might look like. And I think he rightfully said we need to wait for the commission to take action before we can have those conversations. So again, those kinds of details can only come when I have direction from all of you as to a path forward. I absolutely agree on the essential role of partners, and people have said this here. That is part and parcel to the work of the library. That is part and parcel to the work of the Heritage Program. It's stated very clearly in the proposal how important our reliance is on partner dollars. I would be very concerned if the commission would acquiesce their responsibility for the program over concerns of the loss of future dollars. I think it's the responsibility of the commission to be concerned about the stability and the future direction of the program. So to the extent that we're concerned about contracts, to me those are fiscal questions, not philosophical questions about the state library's responsibility to the Heritage Program. I'm dismayed that OCHI was seemingly caught off guard by the conversation because we have been in communication with them directly. I know that Scott, I think, has tried to reach out to them sooner when we left our meeting in October. I know we had talked about Scott arranging a presentation about the program in front of the commissioner. And when I had visited with him later in October, that hadn't been arranged yet, and I'm sure it's because the commissioner is so busy. if there's clear direction from the commission on what we need to resolve with the commission, I would appreciate that clear direction. At some point, we have to make a decision. And to the extent that you're not comfortable making a decision, I understand and respect that. Please give me clear direction on what questions I need to answer so that you feel confident making a decision one way or the other.
I was chided by my colleagues for being unconcise. I think I have put together something that's concise, that takes and addresses. It's changed listening to the comments this morning, this afternoon. I think it is responsive to both the comments, and I think it also provides clear direction. And if the chair wishes, I will take and read my motion, my proposed motion.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your motion. Can I set it up? Can I set up what I think our role is, just so that we're all clear really quickly?
You're the chair.
Okay, I think at this table, we need to consider what our role is. There are many roles in this room. Our role is closely tied to the role of everybody in this room. So there are complications. But our role is distinctly different from the role of the collective role of the room. Our role is to address an unacceptable funding trend that exists now. We're responsible for fulfilling the prioritized functions using core funding. That's what we're responsible for. We aren't meeting our responsibility. We have to do better by this program. And so I'm excited to hear your motion and any other discussion that specifically addresses the needs that Jenny just reiterated, and that specifically gives her the clear directions that she needs in order to do her work.
Okay. And I'll welcome friendly or even unfriendly amendments to this proposed motion, and I will certainly mail this to Marlis and to folks. So let me read it slowly. I move that we table this issue until the Commission's February meeting, leaving open the possibility of scheduling an interim Commission meeting to vote upon this topic. So what that means is no later than February we address this again. I suppose we could table it, but I would hope to God we would not. The intent of my motion is that the state librarian contacts partners, other cooperating agencies, spatial analysis lab, and the university system to identify means of resolving timing, personnel, contract, and other issues raised in regard to the sustainable administration of the Natural Heritage Program.
That's concise.
Fairly concise.
And it's long, and that's what we were looking for. And I hadn't considered the possibility of an interim commission meeting, but I think it's great.
Does that solve your problem as staff?
Frankly, no, I don't think it identifies it at all. We've presented a proposal that addresses personnel issues and funding. If you have more questions about the funding, please ask those questions. There are risks, and we've identified those risks in the proposal. Staff have said that they might not apply for their positions. I can't resolve that. We will not bring this decision to consensus. So if that is what you're asking of me, I'm telling you now, I can't deliver that.
The idea of including the word personnel on that was to give you flexibility if you needed it. If it screws things up, I'd be happy to gank it.
Again, if the commission is philosophically against administering the program, please tell me that now. If you are philosophically considering that and you have questions, what specific questions do you have that might help you make that decision one way or the other?
Well, there's a motion.
Should we second the motion and then have discussion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we second the motion, do you want me to pull the word personnel? Does that make your life difficult?
The vagueness of the motion made my life difficult.
Oh, I thought it was being very unvague.
Is there a second to the motion?
that's easy.
Okay, that's easy, yeah. So the motion is
Motion fails for lack of second.
fails. So I'll entertain another motion.
So if I could ask, is the discussion on the timeliness of it? Is it discussion on the component parts of the motion? What direction can we give the state librarian?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, I think clearly one of the biggest things at the table is the communication with Ochi. So I would suggest a motion that specifically calls for a meeting with Ochi to talk about this. But I don't know if that covers everybody else's concerns as well.
That's also one of my concerns, and I think I am in favor of transitioning the administration to the state library in a hybrid partial way, and the hybrid model to me is not quite thorough enough in the report. Specifically, I'd like to see more feedback from the partners now that they have more to work from. And specifically, I'm less concerned about the state partners. I'm specifically concerned about the contracting officers and decision makers at the federal level and these nuances in the contracting that may come back to affect us later. And in particular, the three positions that we talked about don't include the full spectrum of research contracting officers and such. I asked Melissa at the break if the SWACAP does that, if we have other state resources that could provide advice on the research component. I mean, I'm in favor of bringing bringing the info portions back into the library. That makes total sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me to bring all of the heritage staff over. I think by using the entire 18% the university is using, or 8% if you subtract what they're giving back to the program or whatever it is, they need some skin in the game to keep the spatial lab going, and I would really like to keep the spatial lab operating. So those are my specific things. I have other really the financial part of this. Again, I'm a big picture person, not a big money person, but I didn't understand at all there was no explanation, but it was just a little table at the bottom. I didn't quite understand that, and that's important to me as a commissioner to know, some of these issues and what we're going to be dealing with in terms of the future funding. But I absolutely am in support of transitioning this to the library for portions of the administration and dealing with the gap in the core services funding gap.
This is a really difficult conversation to have because there are some of us who are perfectly fine with the proposal as it is. So it's only, so the specific direction for what else do we need is not a collective we. It's only the we for the people who need something else. So to identify those things, person by person, I don't know how one person proposes a motion to do that. From what I understand from Scott is that we wouldn't be able to even talk about what the contract would be like for the spatial analysis lab until the commission takes action. So some of those aren't achievable until we take action.
Right. And I'm not quite sure how to take action without it being take action on the port. I mean, I'm not quite sure how to do
that. I'm with Kenning, and I'd like to see the result from the Ochi.
So a report from a meeting with Ochi.
Yeah.
If there are specific questions you would like asked of Ochi, that would be helpful. In my mind, the question with regard to partners is fiscal implications, financial implications.
The attorney sort of gave us kind of maybe it's right and maybe it's not. So if we could have that defined of, can we do this, or does that make sense? I mean, she sort of had me kind of confused by the time she finished.
Mm-hmm. Can I speak to a couple of things that she said? She asked about the idea, the natural resource data Advisory Council should have been consulted for this. And I guess I'll preface this by saying there were some suggestions earlier. I don't want to get too negative here, but it was made to suggest that Jenny prepared this on her own. I was heavily involved, and I take a lot of pride in this proposal. It may not be perfect, but in that process, one thing that's very important to us is that we're not proposing a change to the program. To what the program does, we document that every biennium in a memorandum of understanding with each of our core partners for the Natural Resource Data Advisory Council. We refer to it as the Interest Advisory Committee. That's been signed. I feel like if we were suggesting changes to that, then that would prompt a meeting with that group. Having said that, as long as I've been here, they have deferred to the Natural Heritage Partners meeting for any issues heritage related. We've had updates on heritage when we've had those meetings, but the primary guidance they have had in those meetings has been focused on water information and data access for the larger natural resource information system. So I respect her opinion on that, but I just want to be clear how things function and why it's my belief that as long as we're continuing to provide services, and that's the goal of what we're doing, we have absolutely made sure to communicate with the members of that advisory council, but calling a meeting specifically for that. It may not be harmful, I'm not suggesting that, but I haven't felt that that was a requirement for this process. So.
Well, are we allowed to speak then from the audience? Is that where we're in? Because we've had a statement from the legal counsel from the commissioner's office about this. And so then having Evan have a counter argument, I think is probably not the same weight that it carries.
I would happily ask an attorney whether or not we need the NRES Advisory Council to meet and take action on a recommendation. That is fine. We also have a legal opinion from the state attorney on the legal relationship between the state library and the university and how that relationship is impacted through the contract and the contracts.
I guess what I'm coming down to is the purpose, and I do that in my day-to-day work with the OPI, is what is the purpose of the action? And the purpose of this action, if I'm reading this in page 2 of the report, first paragraph, there is no guarantee for funding, for stability, but yet we come back to that. And I would never, as a commission, want to micromanage the job of the state librarian within the framework of possibilities. But I would like to give direction within that. But I do not know at this point, and I'm very hesitant to vote on anything, if indeed this is going to enhance the program that, or enhance the library, enhance the program that we have with the partners, or if this is going to, over a period of time, what that enhancement might look like. I would never want to go backward. I would always want to go forward. So I don't know if I have enough information and if I can scriptly give you what you're seeking, and I so appreciate that, of a direction. But I don't know if we could do that on a metric of coming back to a principle that I did here of do no harm, but I'm looking at enhancement. How can we enhance for Montana a program that is nationally very held high? So I'm at a quandary.
If we continue doing what we're doing harm.
Well, but
Bryce agreed
so
with
if,
that.
if the and what you mean by that is the core funding is the problem, right? So if the core funding situation were solved some other way, would this still be a proposal? If you had enough core funding, would this proposal still stand?
Well, the measure of that should very simply be, back, I think, there's nothing for sure, right? But what having the university system administer it or having the state library administer the program, which has the best likelihood over time of improving the delivery of content and services to our end users. And if you know the answer to that and can guarantee it, I'll buy you lunch. Because I don't think we know, but I think we just have to make guesses. And I would vote, came prepared to vote for it today because, and I don't mean to cast aspersions, but over the last decade, that we haven't achieved any traction with the university administrating.
To the core funding piece,
To the core funding.
right? But the grant funding, the contract funding, would you agree that has worked well?
The soft funding that we aren't directly responsible for, and that we can't guarantee the maintenance of.
I would agree that it saved our bacon
But yes.
over the last couple of years, or longer period than that.
Not just saving the bacon, but hasn't that research produced most of the data that's going into the Natural Heritage Program?
Yes, but if we'd had unlimited sources of funds, which of course is a pipe dream, would we have structured the program differently over those years rather than depending upon soft funding? I don't know the answer to that.
But one of the biggest concerns that came through for me today was the concern about what the shift of grants and contracts to the state library will do from the funders of those grants and contracts, whether they will be willing to go along with that.
Which was the purpose of my motion,
and
is to discover that before next meeting.
If there's any truth to that, then that will dramatically impact the ability of the Natural Heritage Program to continue to build the data that it collects.
That was my understanding of your motion. Do you feel like there needed to be some wordsmithing for it to make more sense?
No, that again is why I think the conversation with OCHI needs to happen, and I think there's a possibility that OCHI could help with core funding.
Is there a way to amend your motion so that we can be
We can
a little
put
more
a new
specific
motion.
with it?
That motion died.
Exactly.
But you can start. You can
Exactly.
propose a new one. Yeah.
Here's the keyboard, my friend.
I mean, my concern still lies with, and I have utmost respect and trust in the staff and leadership of the library. But I feel like Jenny, you and the other leadership are still, I'm sensing that you're still resisting the all or nothing thing. And I know you've explored other options, but when I look at the core funding, which is right up there, there's the two parts to me that are not part of our information services and any research programs that apply to those. Like the two that require more, that are more difficult, are filling information requests and then potentially maintaining species status. I mean, those are the two functions. Everything else the library does extremely well, and I can see research relating to that indirect costs come to the library. What I don't see is this rock and a hard place of the university has no skin in the game through indirect costs. It's all coming to the university to hire new staff to do the contracting. We're looking at something like $400K if you use the $657,000 goal for core services. Could we restructure? Could we have one of the heritage biologists who is really good at information requests, and they're the lead for funneling the 17 staff, to the public? Something like that where we handle that part. I'm not so sure about the maintaining species status, but can we carve this into some hybrid model that's not all or nothing? That's my question.
I guess I'm surprised, and I guess I didn't articulate well in the proposal that that's exactly what we're hoping for. Not necessarily that specific kind of hybrid model, but maintaining a relationship with the university, really through a reliance on the spatial analysis lab and that relationship. And I hope a very fruitful agreement with the University of Montana. There's nothing to say in this proposal that we wouldn't try to continue to do direct contracts through the university, subcontracts through the university, subcontracts through other universities with other kinds of partners. I'm not at all saying that this is an all or nothing and the work would only be done through the state library. As I've said, and I'll say again, we too rely on those partners and the great work of the program. So I don't see us taking any of that off the table. With specific regard to separating the staff, the staff expressed differences of opinion. Some were very happy to leave the ecology program, for example, at the university and have all the rest of the program come to the library. Others expressed concerns over what that would mean for staff morale, for the cohesiveness of the program, and offered examples of a split model in other states where the program is not successful. It was those factors that we weighed when we made this recommendation.
So what I kind of think of as the information services, or I mean, I'd be interested in a little feedback, or if that's possible, on, I mean, are those the two components of core services that aren't info services, the maintaining species status and fulfilling information requests?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the rest seem clear to me to be part of the info services, and that's where I didn't get the sense. I've heard you say that several times, but I don't get the sense in the proposal that it seems like everything's coming over. And then some of it may come back, but I think we need to maybe formally define what stays and what goes instead of, if I'm trying to be on the fence. I was a bit offended by Scott's letter as well, and I assume we got his attention today through this discussion, and they're going to be willing to do some more discussions on this. But
I guess I don't think it is that black and white, because I think the nature of the work really is project by project and case by case. I know in speaking with staff, you can't say that the botany would come over and not the ecology because of how closely they work together and how closely interrelated their data products are. So, we've talked to staff about, how we could structure individual contracts where the work that's appropriate with the library stays in the library, and if we need to subcontract with the university for field work, for example, we leave that option open. I definitely see opportunities for the broader state library to work on projects with Jessica at the Spatial Analysis Lab, as she said earlier. This kind of proposal gives us that kind of flexibility. So I don't mean to imply in any way that it's all or nothing, black or white. I think it's also a little difficult to say, well, this is where we draw that line without understanding on a project by project basis what those implications are.
So,
I thought it was interesting for me to read the letter, and then I tried to read it again right before, and I read it kind of differently because I got it so late, so I read it at 11 p.m., and it did seem very black and white. But when you go back to the actual proposal was not black and white as far as the Spatial Analysis Lab, as far as, having contracts with the university. So I wonder if it was the timing of the letter that made it seem like, this is going to be black and white, but that wasn't reflected in the proposal. And then reading the letter again in the morning, I read it not offensive, as informative. Thank you. But I did not feel that it was reflective of what was being proposed.
yeah, I agree.
So I think a revision of the report or the proposal to clarify that hybrid model would be really helpful, because I did not understand that either. I see language in there about direct administration of the program. I didn't catch this. Aside from the Spatial Analysis Lab, I see that as a separate section down at the bottom. But what my understanding was that all of the grants and contracts administration would come to the state library. Is that not accurate?
I didn't read it that way. The library is in charge of those.
Maybe we need to have a discussion about direct administration. Direct administration to me looks like the state library involved in having the ability to more directly direct the work of the program, working with the program coordinator on the work plan priorities for the program, as they're bringing in grants and contracts, having the opportunity to look at those individual projects and say, what of this work makes sense for administration through the library? What of this work makes sense for work with the university? If we are able to reach a positive agreement with the University of Montana, and some of those agreements, for example, research grants that that Jessica, in her status as a professor, might bring in, if they're directly administered through the university, that's great. But it puts the state library in the position of being able to direct that kind of work where we aren't right now. And I feel like lacking that direction, we're really putting ourselves and our program at risk. I feel like, the program is being leveraged by the soft dollars rather than the direction of the state library, and yet the state library is the one in statute responsible for the program and has to stand up to the legislature and auditors about the success of the program, and that's largely out of our hands at this point. So Kenning, to your earlier question about the core funding, if we had ample core funding, would we be looking at this? I still have those kinds of concerns.
Okay. Right. Again, based on my reading of this, also, in the last day or two, and I think on the responses that you got from a lot of people today who commented, I think a lot of the concern is about the soft funding and the impression that would be administered all through the state library. Mm-hmm. So clarification of that would, I think, do this proposal a lot of good.
Both of you seem like you're coming around to the kind of specific direction that Jenny was looking at to revise her proposal. Do either of you have a motion that would include giving that kind of specific direction that she would need to proceed?
So I would make a motion then that Jenny revise and clarify the proposal, and that she and possibly the State Library Commission meet with OCHI in January to discuss core funding needs and their concerns.
I second that.
Thanks. Don't ask me to repeat it, though.
That's what I was just going to do. Maybe Marla's got it. So there's a second on the table, and so now there can be discussion, including Jenny. Does that meet the needs that you're looking, that would help you?
If the commission is comfortable that in that meeting with OCHI, and I would ask that Kenning be involved as the designee to OCHI. I think that's important. I don't think it needs to be in the motion, but if the commission has specific questions that they would like to see addressed in that meeting, that would be very helpful.
So just thinking about it, and I had made sure to mark down specific pages because this is all I'm working on today. But I would like us to do homework to ask you specific questions off of this document that hopefully I think can address some of maybe the concerns we've heard, and potentially I think it sounds like we all had concerns about not knowing exactly what the document was. I understand I'd say about 80% of it, but is that enough to make a decision today? So
please,
I would love to provide you in-depth feedback, which I haven't had time to do.
So, Erin, do you think that what you're really suggesting is adding to the motion, amending the motion to make this, and I don't think we absolutely need a motion even, I'm not really sure, it's uncharted territory, to make this a special commission meeting? So that we are not sitting in different meetings telling each other what we talked about in other meetings.
I think you, as the chair, can give us that homework.
Okay.
Give us a deadline.
Okay.
And then potentially I would imagine it would be more of a working session and not an actual, there would be no action items, but we meet before we meet with OCHI. That would be a
working session prior to meeting with OCHI.
That way we can
work that out.
We aren't going into that meeting with questions unanswered, when having this kind of round table makes us look like we know what we're doing.
Marlis, can you repeat the motion, because I tried to write it down.
The best I could get
Okay.
was, he was making a motion to have Jenny revise and clarify the proposal, and that she and commission members meet with OG to clarify funding questions. I thought there was one other to clarify something else, but I didn't catch that.
So, okay, the way I've written it down is that, move that Jenny revise and clarify the proposal, and that the State Library Commission meet with OG in January to discuss core funding needs and OG concerns about the transition proposal.
So the clarification on the proposal is clarification of direct administration, what that means.
Yes, that's one of the, from my perspective, that's one of the things. But I think that the discussion with OG will also, I think we should have the meeting with OG first, and then use that for you to revise and clarify the proposal.
That makes sense.
I agree.
Can I answer a question? The timeline on this, to me, is kind of, it seems to be set around, preparing for the next legislative session and being able to more clearly articulate Heritage Program in relation to the legislature. In my mind, if that's the right, it's the wrong horse driving the thing. It's the federal government that I think has more of a influence. I don't know what the proportion of state versus federal grants are in soft money, but to me, if it's up to the state of Montana and our legislature and political leaders, that is a troubling,
To be clear, this timeline is far too late to have real influence with the legislative session. We'll be doing that planning in the next several months.
Right. That's what I kind of assume. And so, to me, I'm not sure why we're still rushing so fast. I know it puts a tremendous burden on Melissa to hire 3 new contracting people, but I don't want to make that decision. I mean, maybe that can be made with the Office of Commissioner of Higher Education, and that's fine. But I don't want to start the ball rolling. I mean, that's where I think we need to question whether we bring all the staff over. So and all that. To me, I'd rather make it even a broader, because the motion on the table right now hopefully addresses things, but I don't know if it addresses meeting with the key partners of Heritage and working out a lot of the more complicated federal requirements and things like that. I want to make sure that happens as well. And I don't see, personally, I would like to have a meeting in January because I'm not going to be here in February for medical reasons. But at the same time, why are we rushing so much still? If we're talking about something that's this important. And I get a feeling that part of I came in on the fence today, but based on the feedback from all the staff at Heritage and stuff, we still have this sort of impetus to get this done quickly, which still kind of gives people, I think, some pause as to what the agenda is. So, in my mind, the motion could be to work this out and bring it up at the meeting and not try to put any additional. It's fine if we can work it out. And
there is a motion on the table.
There is a motion on the table, and if there's no further comment, I'll call for a vote.
Oh, can I reread my
There's the
revised
second.
motion?
Bruce seconded. Yeah, you can. And but Bruce seconded. You seconded his amended motion, didn't you?
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
Read the motion.
Okay.
So I move that the State Library Commission meet with OG in January to discuss core funding needs and OG concerns about the MT-NHB transition proposal. Jenny will utilize that feedback to revise and clarify the proposal and bring it back to the State Library Commission in February.
Is that workable for staff?
Yes.
Then my second stands. Thank you.
All in favor? I'm sorry. Additional comment? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes.
Jenny, excuse me, as we work through this, would it be possible for us to send, whether we all get it or don't or want to contribute, but if we come up with a question and then we'd have an answer, and
please,
if it's relevant, then maybe it could go out to all of us.
Please.
Because there's still It's very complicated.
Yes, if you have specific questions, please ask them. You all know not to engage in email discussion, but if you have questions, please email them, and we will do our best to ask them. I want you to feel confident in making a decision.
And on that note, I'd also like to say, because of partnership and because we are the state library and you are the state librarian, the integrity of our processes in transparency.
Yep.
So however we have that dialogue back and forth with letters or emails and things like that, is there a repository of who's gathering those and who will be getting more comment so that that's equitably distributed to the commission?
Do you need to actually table the?
Is there a way to provide, for this group to provide guidance in terms of how things are communicated to our partners? Because that just clarified Jenny's role in a meeting with OG, but it says nothing about BLM, Forest Service, NRCS, and all of our other myriad of partners.
I think that's a conversation for your job description.
I'm happy to communicate what you guys have done.
And Jenny writes your job description, right?
No, I don't.
No.
Okay.
So,
I'm sorry.
So to be clear, and
I'm sorry.
I adore Kay, but I'm not the big boss. My only role is to administer a contract.
Okay.
And I don't think it's appropriate to the commission direct staff at that level.
No.
But just to clarify, on a day-to-day working, I do what Jenny and Evan tells me. I very rarely communicate with Scott.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a true partnership. So Marlis asked the question, do we need to table the action?
No, you took action.
We just took action, yeah.
Would it be appropriate for the partners to not communicate with us individually, but if they had questions or comments that we could get what their thoughts were too?
We do that. They send us anytime.
Yeah.
Do you think the mechanism, how would we make it clearer?
If they had a question about the manipulation or the switcheroo or whatever we need to do, that, who pays who does this, who does a project here. If they had a question, if we could be included, that would go to you, would be the more logical person to send it to than me. I don't do math either. At all.
And I know you've been CC'd on your emails have been shared with partners, so I anticipate you'll receive that kind of direct communication. Again, if you have specific questions for partners that would be helpful for you to ask, please let us know so we can ask those questions properly in ways that are informative.
Yeah, I'd like to send that question to you. So
yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's that transparency that I was talking
Yeah.
about. So that
Okay.
we can all have a vision of what someone is sending.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jenny, I just want to say, I know this has been a very difficult conversation, and I know you felt beat up through this, and I know that you are trying to lead the program in the right direction. But there's clearly, everybody in this room cares a lot about this program, and many people have spoken to its great success. So we'll figure this out. We'll get there.
Yeah. Thanks. And I feel a little beat up, but we've said all along, this is about the success of the program. This is about the success of the partners. And as I've said all along, you need to feel confident in the decision that you're making. That's what's most important to me.
When you step out to lead something, you get beat up.
And then you have a glass of beer.
Well, it's not time for that, but it is time for lunch.
Thank you for the long.
So can we do a recess for lunch? Do you guys want to do a working lunch, or how about a 20-minute lunch?
Yes.
Okay, we'll reconvene at 2:20.
So just to let everybody know, law can be changed. It takes a simple majority. That 90, that section in law.
What did you say? I didn't catch what you said.
Law can be changed.
My computer doesn't die. I should grab my.
All right. Are you okay? Are you going to be okay?
Good.
Everybody have battery? Yep. Okay. All right. I'll call back to order at 2:26. I know, 6 minutes late. And Kara's here. And Tracy's here. Okay, is this where we are? Network Advisory Council.
Yeah.
Report.
So I've asked Kara to be here to share specifically some updates on some very important procurement processes that are underway. So Kara, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay. Good afternoon, commissioners. So as you know, we have 2 contracts that are set to expire at the end of this fiscal year. The overdrive contract that the state holds for Montana Ready to Go, and the OCLC Group Services contract, which provides cataloging, interlibrary loan, and hosted content management solution, Content DM, for the Montana Memory Project. So first, I will bring you up to date on where we are with the Montana Library to Go request for information. We ran that RFI in October, and quick little background on Library to Go. If you're not familiar, we support 93 libraries, predominantly public and tribal libraries, and also a few academics that have been grandfathered into our contract with Overdrive. We, the state library, pay the hosting fee, and the libraries contribute an annual fee that goes towards purchasing content, which goes into an entirely shared collection of ebooks and audiobooks, which is streamed online or downloaded to patrons' devices. So, some concerns that we have with our current contract that we seek to address through this process are the sustainability of rising costs as demand increases for content. The licensing models that are currently available to libraries are not competitive with consumer models, and so we have struggled to keep up with demand as library budgets are not increasing, as you know, as demand is increasing. And so that is not exactly something that we can address directly through a contract because it's about our relationship with publishers, but we would prefer to have a contract and a relationship with someone who can advocate for us in that area and to help us to build stronger relationships with publishers. Another concern is that we do have silos currently in who can access what materials. I just had a phone call actually about an hour ago from the library director at Miles Community College, Terusha Shipstead, and she is considering pulling out of Montana to Go. She's seeing lower use of that platform, so she's trying to determine where to direct her patrons to get access. And ideally, it would be pretty seamless for anybody, regardless of what their status is. If they're a library user, they should be able to get the content that they're looking for. And so, ideally, we would like to have that kind of relationship established through our contract. So, our overall goals of the contract for Montana Library Go, we have that seamless access at least to ebooks and audiobooks. There is interest in other platforms, but our budget constraints right now, we're just looking at ebooks and audiobooks. And we're also interested in expanding that collection to include public domain and open access resources that we're not currently making a lot of use of in our contract, which is really focused on those big 5 ongoing works. We would like every public library to be able to participate. Indeed, we'd like any type of library to be able to participate and share content. And of course, as I mentioned, the licensing models, we would like to see some progress and some advocacy on behalf of libraries. So we would like to have more data on what end users are expressing directly. Right now, we are reliant on our libraries to communicate that to us. And so we did have an RFI committee composed of librarians from member libraries from the consortium who helped us to articulate what our goals are, what our needs are that are currently being met, and things that we would like to meet in the new contract. And so based on that input, we crafted a list of questions and released the RFI. We had 6 vendors respond, and 3 of them were really competitive with Overdrive for this particular contract. Baker & Taylor, Biblioteca, and the Digital Public Library of America, which, of course, we have a pilot with DPLA currently. And I think I'm going to keep this pretty high level because I realize you're running behind in schedule. But if you have questions about the specific responses, I'm happy to answer questions. We are reviewing those responses and pulling out from those responses the things that we would optimally like to have in our next contract. And so based on those responses, we will craft the RFP questions. I am going to be recruiting for the RFP committee very soon and hope to release the RFP in January for fiscal year 21 contract. So that's where we are with Montana Library to Go.
Is 21 July 1?
Yes.
Thank you.
Carol, when you do an RFI like that, do you give the 3 that you felt were not competitive, do you give them any feedback?
Well, the other 3 were formats that we're not currently providing through Montana Library to Go, and although libraries have expressed interest in, for example, EBSCO responded with information about their e-magazine service. And so that is not something that the Montana Library to Go consortium is considering contracting through the state for right now, but we do have plans to schedule an informational webinar in January to let librarians know more about those responses. They are posted on our RFP webpage, which is on the statewide projects site. So all that information is out there, but we'll be walking through those and seeing if there are any opportunities to facilitate opt-in groups. So the OCLC RFI is a first for us in my time at the State Library. We have held a sole source contract for OCLC during all the time that I've been managing this program, which is 7 years. And so as we were examining our needs for interlibrary loan and cataloging and reflecting on the way that those needs have changed as our shared catalog has developed and those resource sharing groups have become much more relevant to a lot of our public libraries and have provided a more seamless experience for those patrons, we realized that we have some evolving needs in those areas that could be updated in a contract. We are also aware that there are some competitors to content fund that we should exercise due diligence in exploring. And so we did request that OCLC respond to the RFI. They were actually the only offer that responded with information about cataloging and interlibrary loan. And so at this point, we are awaiting some additional information from the state of Florida. Jenny informed me that they are seeking, I believe they're seeking a contract with a company called Autographics, which provides some cataloging
interlibrary loan,
and interlibrary loan services that would be worth investigating. But we're not sure on what Florida's timeline is. So obviously we have a few more months until the beginning of the new fiscal year, and so once we know more about Florida's timeline, we may need to move forward with the RFI committee's recommendation to negotiate another sole source contract for those 2 components of the group services contract. In which case, we would be thinking about those current needs and some other data needs that we would like the contract to reflect. As for the MMP portion of the contract, I believe that we are strongly considering moving to RFP. Jennifer Brunel and I visited with the Historical Society yesterday to go over their concerns and needs for this contract and to talk about what this process would look like. Will you look at
Just that at first they were a little resistant to the change. They are financial supporters in that. They pay for half of that contract, so of course we want them on board. I think by the end of the conversation, they were on board and they're reviewing our questions and are going to give us some feedback on how to set up that RFP. And we hope that with that timeline, we would actually have the RFP to procurement by the end of January. So we had 2 respondents that gave really strong responses in the RFI process, and a third one that didn't respond, that we've encouraged to respond, and they opted out because of the accessibility requirements that we had listed in the RFI. But we told them to please respond anyway, that might not prevent them from being the candidate who would go, and especially if that's something they would look at improving down the road. So we're hoping for at least 3 responses back in the RFP. Besides content, yeah, I should say forward.
Thank you. This isn't an action item. Do you guys have any questions for them? I really appreciate the update and the work that you're doing to get us the best deal.
I did want to talk just briefly about sort of some work processes that we're hoping to adopt within the Network Advisory Council. I think it'll take a little bit of time and a little bit of finessing to get to a process routine that we're comfortable with, but I really like the model of the Land Information Advisory Council, where they put together an annual land plan. Maybe the plan doesn't have to be annual, but they think about those work priorities on an annual basis months ahead of the start of a fiscal year, so that we really have time to plan and launch those work efforts successfully. And that's really not something that we've done with the Network Advisory Council. And yet we have this LSTA 5-year plan that really is a good guiding document for the priorities of the work that we might be able to consider. So I've been working with Kara and Tracy, and we've had some initial discussions with the NAC about trying to consider our work plan priorities, perhaps have something that looks like a library development plan that's based on the 5-year plan, where with the NAC we are articulating for the coming fiscal year what our library development priorities are. So it's a little bit of a work in progress, but Tracy, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything about the nature of the discussion that the NAC had about what some of those priorities might look like.
So the NAC took a look at the 5-year LSTA plan, and basically Amy, Kara, Jennifer, and I reviewed it and listed what we haven't really begun working on. And out of that list, the NAC talked a lot about the courier and the logistics of moving materials. Because that's definitely, it works great for some libraries, but not all. And so they, Pamela Benjamin has suggested that perhaps we could approach Western Transport Institute, I believe it's called, and that's based out of MSU, that will do an analysis of those kinds of logistical things, which is, we thought, a great suggestion. It might really help us break that, because that's a really challenging one to figure out how to move materials around the state. The NAC also talked quite a bit about economic development and continuing that work, which we are beginning that process of contracting with the consultants to help us. And then the final piece that the NAC asked us to add to our FY21 was really talking about, I think, both non-users, but including that in a larger umbrella of people who just don't see value in libraries, whether it's because they don't use libraries or perhaps because they see libraries as irrelevant. And so that is a piece that the NAC also asked us to work on, in conjunction, I think, with some advocacy work that we've begun as well. So those were sort of the key areas they hoped.
Great. We, of course, don't have an LSTA award for the current fiscal year at this point. So once we have that award, I think we can take the input from the NAC in helping us think about the work plan priorities and the funding then that we have available to think about how we can put these suggestions into action in our FY21 work plan.
Thank you. Let's see, the next thing on the agenda is the Land Information Council report. So we preferred.
She's right next.
I was, yeah.
Yes.
I knew I saw her. We could move the agenda if she's not available. Hi. Can you talk to us about
Nice of you to
Do you have a moment to talk to present the recommendation memo for the 21 land plan?
Yes, hello. Give me a moment, yes, to regroup. Just talking grant stuff. Okay, so so what you should have in front of you, or what you I think received, is a copy of the FY 2021 Land Information Plan, and that was approved by the council on November 13th, I do believe.
20.
Wait, what's
I think
today?
we had a later meeting for the
week
next.
before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
The Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Oh.
Not immediately before Thanksgiving, but the week right prior.
That's what.
20th.
20th.
Yeah, okay,
Yep.
okay.
All right.
Yep.
I was at the meeting and I was not at the meeting on the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was I. So we didn't intend to make any major changes, but then when we started reviewing it and writing it, we decided we needed some changes. And basically, we wanted to give a lot more explanation and kind of reorganize things a little at the beginning of the document, and make a section you'll see for the funding, the grant program, the code itself. And so that looks a lot different from last year's, because what we were trying to do is not be too heavy-handed in planning every year for the land plan, because then what it seems as though we're always doing is just planning. And but we saw that a lot of last year's plan kind of also discussed some of the budget cuts that had happened, and we wanted to refresh that and remove that from the situation. And so another major, change that we made this year is in the grant section, grant priorities. And the reason why we changed this, and this was something that Evan and I had been kind of talking about for a while, is that we were seeing a lot of infrastructure grants, and it was filling one priority of helping local governments basically document their infrastructure and start GIS programs. And so the intent was, well, if we're going to be funding these grants, well, it's a startup. It's a start of their GIS program, right? We thought it's not exactly ideal to what we want to see, because it's not a statewide layer. So most of them are water and sewer, and that's not collected at statewide, and I'm not sure that it ever will be. And so it was very very local driven. But what we weren't seeing is GIS programs start up. And so even though we think that those are important, and we do not want to sway people from applying for those types of grants, we wanted to create a method where something that contributed had a greater public benefit because it contributed to a larger database or affected more people, programs, organizations. We wanted to create a way for those to rise to the top. So that's where our tiers come in. So we have a tier 1 and a tier 2. And also in the tier 2, we saw a need for some pre-planning or planning to take place for some of these grant applications. Is that there was either not a ton of support or understanding of the value or the complexity of a GIS project at the local level. And so we have we have several people who are very well versed in grants on the council. They They either like grant administrators or grant writers or planners, and so they live in the world of grants in the state government. And so they are the ones that kind of came up with this idea. It's called like a mini planning grant. And so we've allocated through that second tier that we're going to allow for a certain percentage of the money to be spent towards for these types of grants. And I think it's a great idea because what it does is it really forces the local government to be a little more strategic, and it gives them kind of like a breath of like, oh, I really want to do GIS. Instead of rushing to try to find someone to help them write that grant, they can rush to find someone to help them think about what they want to do. And I think in the long run, what it will do, well, this is our hope, is that it will not only allow for a local government or state, tribal, to be more prepared to take on a GIS project, but I think it will build a better partnership with us. And that is another one of the key parts of the program, is building that relationship. So we know who we're going to call up and say, hey, your metadata is out of whack, or hey, we haven't gotten a file from you in a while, and creating that relationship there. And we even have a little write-up for these NITI planning grants that we will publish with the grant materials, which is what we were talking about over there, where it'll be, we're still lining it out, trying to decide what we're exactly going to do, but there'll be money for them to come meet with us and discuss the program, what they want to do, talk to the technical experts. Like if they're going to do Next Gen 911, they can speak with Michael. If they're going to talk about boundaries, they can speak with Megan. Or water, they can speak with Troy. And then just basic project management, administration, they can speak to Evan. I'm just myself. So that is something totally different and kind of exciting. So I'm happy about that. Every year I always say, okay, better next year, and we find little pieces of the program that we can tweak and try to improve upon. And I hope that this is a major improvement. So those are some of the things I wanted to highlight. Any questions?
It was a really good meeting.
Oh yeah, it was a really good meeting. Thank you. Yeah,
it really was. Someone else said, I think Ken mentioned it earlier, that everyone seemed just to kind of dig in and dig a little bit deeper.
We've got a good group.
It was good discussions. It was fun to sit there and absorb.
Yeah.
Such as I can.
Boy, when you're on, you can be on, and it's such a good feeling. And I think that after that meeting, we really had a lot of great discussion. And sometimes I feel like, oh, what are we going to talk about? Is it going to last the whole time? I think we went over like half hour.
We did.
Well, that's the kind of excitement that the really spawned the state library as we see it now.
Yeah.
This is an action item. Do we have a plan, a motion to approve the 2021 land plan?
I'm so moved.
Second.
And is there any more discussion or public comment?
Can I
Please.
I just wanted to add on to what Erin was saying, simply to say, yeah, there are a couple of big higher level things that we're trying to, I don't want to say fix, but improve. One is just ensuring that the granting program is going back to that overall objective of improving both the spatial data infrastructure and coordination across the state. So I think there's good steps there. And the other is, the time commitment that we have to make to maintain and administer those grants. I mean, a lot of you probably know, when you get a grant through and it looks like a really good grant, and then Erin gets a phone call and they just say, what do I do now? That's really, we want to help and we want to be sure these are successful, but having that opportunity for the planning grant, I think, is going to really help things there. There's some other models that we've seen at different levels. I think 50 States Initiative was one, trying to get GIS programs in every state. And then the geospatial security model is another, where trying to do more detailed planning, but I think this is a good first step. And maybe that something like that is down the road, maybe not. This is great. That's
Yeah.
my brief.
From those mini planning grants, I think then we can take and do education and outreach based on what we find out. And we're really trying to, through the planning process, or through the grant process itself, is also allow for more education to be a component in the grant, because we see that really lacking as well.
And that's great, it creates capacity.
Exactly, absolutely. That was the grant category back in the day, capacity building, but we changed that too.
Figure out a better way
Yeah,
to ensure that's happening.
So roughly 11,000 subs is going to be available for those. So are they going to be, you envision them being like, if you get 5 of them, you'll split that 11,000 up among the 5 or something?
Probably. And so Jerry Grevence, he works for Great West, and he is a planner, but also is very well versed in grants. Like I said, he was one of the ones that's also on our subcommittee. And he wrote it. He's just like, let's do a mini planning grant. And then I was like, great. He's like, here's a 1-pager. And I'm like, even better, thank you. And I was just like, you did my work. And it's like $1,000 or $2,000, depending. I think we can be flexible. That's the great part, is we can be flexible. And it's not supposed to like go in and do like a deep down dive. It's just really like, let's get everybody on the same page. Let's talk about it. And he thought that, 1,000 to 2,000 was plenty in his expertise. So.
Be good if you could, we had some success with this with earlier MLA grants of not only taking that pool of people as individually one-on-one, but do some web conferencing with them. That really built a cohort, and they still now rely on each other ongoing for assistance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. We work a lot in cohorts in library development, and I think we can think about how we can lean on Joe Flick and some of those staff to help create that kind of model. That's a great idea.
Be good too. There's a lot of crossover with Next Gen 911 in relation to most of our sheriff's offices, and I think we tend to, like, I was really encouraged. I think you might have got a little bit of flack from MLA. I wasn't quite sure, but on putting the June-enabled elections in, that was a very, very smart thing to do. I think.
Thank you.
And very welcoming. And so I tend to think of the clerks, the county clerks, the clerk of recorders, and others. But like with Next Gen, a lot of these rural counties, if they're going to have anybody, it's going to be someone in the sheriff's or dispatch office that kind of picks up and works on that.
Right.
So they do their outreach.
I just, before this, I was over at the Secretary of State's office meeting with the elections people, the clerks and reporters. And they were so excited, and it was a fantastic meeting, and it aligned so well with Next Gen 911, what they're doing. They both need good addresses. They both need, decent imagery. They both need boundaries. And so, and what we'll be doing is creating efficiency at the local level with the communication of the data, and then eventually taking it out to the state. And I just, as much as I've spoken, I guess maybe at a high level about geo-enabled elections, because I've been part of that group at NISTIC for a while. Yeah, I thought people didn't understand it, and I thought it was, well communicated which direction we were going, but I guess we'll just leave it as this long-standing agenda. I know.
The other thing with the training part, we've done this. So I'm kind of a little bit stepping out of my commissioners, getting in the weeds a little bit, but what we found worked the best is that ongoing mentoring, and it gets into a broader, maybe it's a new topic, which I've been trying to figure out how to bring up eventually, but the whole service center or lack thereof, or what role the state library plays.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these little counties are just they don't have the resources to support a GIS program or even a partial person really.
Right.
But what we found works the best is that focused tasks, like Next Gen's a good example, because they have to do specific things for a couple of layers, and it's not learn this whole thing, it's learn how to do these things. And, it takes more 200-300 hours per project of training, I see a lot of MLA grants that say they're going to have 5 hours of training.
Or one day.
And that it takes that ongoing mentoring with these little counties.
Yeah, Jenny and I have met with Esri to see what we could do for local governments, like the City of Shotos
Yeah.
of Montana, who were a grant recipient, a very self-proclaimed postage stamp community.
Yeah.
And how we could, as the state library, serve some sort of role, even in even in licensing, because it's unaffordable. It's like 100% unaffordable at that level, and we're just so unique in that. I wouldn't even call it rural in some areas. It's frontier, right? So we have such a small tax base, but they still need to complete the same things as a larger community does, just at a smaller scale. They still need to do good elections. They still need to find people when they call 911. They still, need to keep track of their assets. And so we started the conversation. It didn't really go anywhere, but I think that one day we could be that capacity for locals. And they're technically, grantees are our contractor. And the reason why I want to put the education component in there is that I think that, well, right now, they could fall under our education piece of our enterprise license agreement, but allocating them money would have to be something we have to think about in a greater scheme of things. But that could be a way to help promote the education component. The other thing with Esri training is that you can create learning paths now. So I can create a learning path for Jenny and say, Jenny, you want to be able to create a story map. Here are the 4 classes you need to take, and I can assign it to her. And then when I see that she's done, I'm like, okay, now try this one. And so if I have it's almost like a resume or syllabus, but if I have a grant recipient coming in and they want $50,000 for Next Gen 911, I know you're going to need these 4 classes or this type of training. Prove to me that you've taken it, or please allot the money to take these courses, and basically recommending them a course list.
Marlis, do we have anybody left online?
Just Jim.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So no comments from online?
No, so far.
Okay. We have a motion on the table and a second to adopt the 2021 land plan. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Erin, thank you for coming and sharing. And that sounds like you did quite an overhaul.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
It sounds like a lot of time and work.
It is.
So.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. All right.
See the strategy for the.
We should eat lunch first when we get here.
Yes.
See how much better mood everybody is.
Yes. Well, and it is 3:00, and we do have a reception, following this. So
I just want to note that the
keep hydrating.
The GIS plan for helping out small communities very clearly mimics the library development for public
Isn't that,
library services.
Yeah.
Yep.
That stands out.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, that's neat. So the next item is an action item, and it's the State Library Commission and the Trust for Montana Libraries Board draft MOU and fiscal agency agreement. Not positive about the difference. Even after reading them, you can explain.
So the memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement is really the sort of the governing body between these two entities. It lays out the communication path between the commission and the board, and helps to set out the process by which the commission can identify opportunities for funding priorities, and or the trust, when making decisions, might communicate with the commission about the types of programs and projects that they might consider adopting. And in just a formal way, the sort of the model for the agreement came from Library Strategies and their work in developing boards around the country. And then the fiscal agency agreement is the agreement that allows the trust to be the fiscal agent, the fiscal sponsor for those kinds of grants for which the state library as a state agency could not otherwise apply, and the terms under which we could have that kind of agreement. There was great input from members of the commission in developing these two documents. They have gone through legal review from our attorney. They have also been reviewed by the trust board. I think the trust board was generally comfortable in adopting them, but wanted the commission to take action, and then they would adopt them themselves.
I read over them, and I'm going to vote for them. I was a bit struck by, in the MOU, the word statewide or the word collaborative or the word cooperative did not appear once. I'm not worried about it, but my understanding, my hope for the trust has always been that it doesn't necessarily just support the state library, but that it supports these statewide projects. And my one thought is might have been a clear signal to the rest of the state that we haven't changed our story. Mm-hmm. So I missed the inclusion of at least one of those words. But I intend to vote yes.
Well, I would move to read separate motions for each item.
I think we do.
Okay.
Okay, so I would move to accept the MOU, make sure that's the memorandum of agreement as drafted.
Second.
All in favor? Or
Aye.
is there any public comment? Mm-hmm. All in favor? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I will say that,
let's do that.
Stu Wilson
Thank
had
you.
hoped to join us from Library Strategies, but had to drop off. He texted me to say he wasn't going to be able to join given the late action.
I'll join for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. Did he? Okay.
Mm. He tried.
Yeah.
I guess a little bit of public comment about it. I'm happy to see it because I feel like these two items are the things that we kept asking questions about, expecting to see at an earlier date. So I'm happy to finally see them. And I think, we just didn't know quite on the timing of when to expect things. So I am happy to see them, and they do answer a lot of the questions that I felt like were just kind of lingering.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hey, Ken's back with the vote.
Ken, for the Library Commission / Trust from Montana Libraries, we're taking action, 2 different actions. So for right now, there's a motion and a second to accept the memo of agreement draft. So I'll call for a vote on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. And then let's look at the fiscal sponsor memorandum of agreement. And Jenny just gave us a good overview of the difference between the two. But is there any further public comment on that one? I feel like the commission's contributed a lot of public comment, a lot of comment. So it sounds like we're ready to vote. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Oh, I'm so glad that's going to move forward.
Good.
All right. We need to look, and this is close to our final, or we're going to have some other business and announcements, but this is close to our final item. We need to look at our work plan, our calendar, and set some dates. Can we start by open? Is everybody able to open the calendar? Can we start with that? And I'm looking at maybe let's talk about the Federation meetings if people can think that far, plan that far in advance. I'm planning on attending the Broad Valleys, although they're they're struggling a bit with their dates. I think it's going to be Leap Day, last I heard.
That was my great-grandmother's birthday.
Was it? Oh, that's so neat. Yeah, they're looking for kind of a change in venue and to mix it up. So I think they're looking for the best deal dates. But I plan to go to that one. It's in my neck of the woods. Does anybody are looking at the spring Federation meetings? Does anybody foresee their availability? Or at least we can think about it, get it on the calendar to think about.
I always go to the Tamarack one.
Okay.
This is my local one, but I'm trying to remember what it was in the past. I won't be able to drive anywhere until March.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
It'll be in May, so.
Oh, that'll work.
Yeah.
So I'll go to that one for sure.
Good.
And I'm going to try to, likely going to have some work projects out in eastern Montana. I was really fun to go out there this year, even though long drives, but enjoyed the drives, missed the snow. So I can't say at this point, but I should be able to say by
the February meeting?
Yeah.
Well, not by the February meeting, but
okay.
Yeah, I'll have a better idea of what I can do out there.
Yeah, and I know it's the holiday, so it's a bad time to think about it, but if we can just start thinking about, because the spring comes up quickly. Some of the meetings do. Some of them are May. They seem to be really spread out. And then we'll talk about meetings in a second, but the other thing that's on our calendar is the May. Well, I want to point out MLA is April 1 through 4th, and where are we on their schedule?
We are
already. Okay,
yep.
Great. Is it going to be for the Thursday morning?
The conversations with the commission will be. I believe it is Thursday morning again.
Okay.
And the commission meeting will be Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay. Have we thought about what the
assuming that's the action that you take today. You have action to set your meeting dates.
Have we thought about what the conversations would be about?
Largely around the public library standards. I hope we'll be in a public comment period about the public library standards. So I think that's an appropriate time to discuss it.
No pressure.
All right. So as many people as can attend, please, if you're not a member of MLA, please get in contact with Jenny. I think the rule is still that people have to sign up for membership. You can't just be a speaker.
We at least have to pay registration.
Registration. Okay. Registration.
Is it Missoula this year?
Yes. Yeah. And then the other thing that's on the calendar for sure is National Library Legislative Day. And we've all kind of just sort of sat around and talked about who should go, but I was thinking we would do it a little bit differently this year. It's on May 4th, which I think is May 4th would be trainings typically and speakers about good lobbying practices, and then May 5th would most likely be Hill Visit. So that's a Monday, Tuesday. So I'm hoping, instead of trying to commit, that everybody can go look at their calendar and then just let me know. Email me if that's something that you're able to do. And Marlis, as far as travel planning, what's a good time? January 15th? When do you need to know?
Well, as far as travel, there's not any real deadline other than the closer we get, the more expensive it gets.
It gets expensive.
Motels are really few and far between, so sooner the better as far as
I think January 15th. Do you think going past that? Okay, if you could get to me, if you could email me by January 15th, if you would like to attend, because I went last time, so I would love for somebody else to go this time. And then but we only have money to send one person. So if everybody wants to go, then we'll I want to talk to John Finn and Crossover about what the MLA priorities are. And then it's very likely that there's going to be some of us who are very adept at speaking to whatever those priorities are. And I don't know what they are. So we'll just start planning that. But if you could email me by January 15th, if you're interested.
So can I make a comment? I am interested, but that is actually my last month of service on the commission. I don't know, is it ethical for me to want to go to this?
Well, why don't you send me an email that you're interested in? That's the situation, and then we'll think it. Then we'll talk about the ethics.
To go to DC.
Yeah.
It is in DC. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, just as I can send it in my email.
Yeah.
But as a continued, Montana librarian, I think skills and the experience would be meaningful.
Sure.
But I will put that in an email.
Good. Yes, thank you. That would be great to hear from as many people as possible. As far as I know, we only have funding for one person.
And the date is?
But that's something that we would look at. May 4th and 5th, which is a Monday and a Tuesday.
Okay, I got confused.
It's confusing. Yeah. And then I see on the calendar a tentative MLAC meeting. Is there anything else that you wanted, a conference that you wanted to tell us about?
The meeting date that I wanted to make sure to draw to your attention is June 10th. It's listed as tentative. We are planning the Leadership Institute is it the Directors Institute or the Leadership Institute? Correct me if I'm Directors Institute in Great Falls around the commission meeting. And our hope is that if you schedule the meeting on that date, that we can create some opportunities for interaction between the commission and the library directors who are there attending that institute.
So that meeting would be in Great Falls?
Yes.
Oh.
At Paris Gibson or the library? I'm sorry, that's what I meant. That's what I meant.
That's a great place.
Yeah. So the two tentative commission dates are the April 1st at the Library Association conference, and then June 10th at the Ursuline Center in conjunction with the Directors Institute. And then just for your own thinking, for a potential August or probably maybe October would be a little bit better. The Missoula Public Library is having their grand opening this summer, and it's been a practice of the commission to try to hold a meeting in some of our newer libraries. So if the commission is interested, I would work with Honor Bray to try to schedule maybe like the October meeting there in Missoula.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. That's something that we can think about and get back to Jenny about. It sounds like I don't think we need to pin that date down today. So as far as what the dates that we need to vote on today, I'm not sure what they are. Just the next.
The next year, if we can get them.
So every month, the second Wednesday, except for those dates.
So the dates, but not the locations, is what we're going to vote to approve right now.
Right.
Okay, and I know, do we have to go all the way through December?
I know Kenning has some conflicts with December, so I think it's worth talking about a December date that might work better for him.
Going someplace warm?
He always has you have a conference every year, conference conflict.
You see, but I was just looking at the dates for the next few years, and it looks like they've shifted to the next week, so it might be. Looks like we're just okay staying where we are.
So the 9th works for you then?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody see any issues with the meeting dates as they're currently listed?
I move adoption as presented.
Second. Good job.
Comments? Okay, can we approve? There's a motion to adopt the dates as recommended on this calendar, and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Okay, and I'll hear back about all of you. I'll hear back from all of you about National Library Legislative Day. If some of you don't want to go, but I'm a little bit interested in having some kind of event here because they stream this day, and I think it would be very interesting and timely for some of our local librarians to get some instruction in lobbying. Yeah, and maybe we even have panels of maybe even former legislators or Jamie. People who are good at talking and lobbying.
Elsie would be a good.
Elsie, she would be wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, so there might be some
There you go.
possibility.
There you go.
There might be
Thank
some
you.
possibilities for us to do a legislative day for Montana,
I think
and
that's a great idea.
you know we've tried that, but it was pre-streaming, pre them streaming anyway, so it would be fun.
We can also ask maybe some past or even current senatorial or congressional staffers. Some of you remember Hannah Van Hoos from Senator Tester's office. She's back in the state. Someone like that might also be available to sit on a panel, or Robin Madison from different offices. We could ask for their input too.
It is so neat to go to those and to hear the legislators or their staff talk about how best to approach them. You know, what kind of information sinks in the best and is passed on the best. So so if there are some options whether or not you want to go to DC, I'm thinking maybe we could arrange something. And what else do we need to take action on for the calendar? No, nothing.
I don't think so. Just a reminder. I'm not sure since we had to postpone the partners mapping day from November. It is scheduled for tomorrow. I think a couple of commissioners had intended to attend in November, but I don't know. You're going tomorrow. Of course, other commissioners are invited.
I intend to attend, but I have to leave after lunch.
Okay. Do we have so many that we should have noticed it?
No,
I'll pass
I
out.
don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
We won't have a
What is
quorum.
this one? Montana mapping?
The community.
You were gonna go.
Yeah, the community partner mapping that we had scheduled in November, but then weather prohibited some staff from traveling in. This is a day planned with our leadership staff and leads to talk about who our primary partners are, what we want to get from those kinds of partnerships, how we can best coordinate as staff. This was something that we had talked about with the commission.
That's still planned for
on part of the work plan, yes.
And I believe we had so many that were going to come originally that I think we had noticed it as a meeting, but I bet you're ready to go home again.
I'm confused. When is this?
This
Tomorrow.
is tomorrow.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But you can.
Is there anybody
move
else?
Oh,
Moving
okay.
cows.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, this was a work plan item that the commission had discussed when we were discussing work plans, so we'll certainly have a report back at your February meeting.
I would come. Okay. Wear this again tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. Wear it every day.
You know I don't.
You could.
Under my long underwear that I wear every day.
Is anybody else think, Erin, were you planning on heading back, or were you planning on coming to that mapping meeting tomorrow? You need to head back. Okay.
I've stayed over, but I'm not sure that I'm invited.
You're okay. All right. Sounds good.
I'm potentially interested in, since I won't be able to make the Pathfinder meeting, maybe the Sagebrush in March.
Okay.
Just asking someone if they want to get my travel partner.
Okay.
That would be nice. And then I've never seen anything other than Tamarack and Pathfinder, so it'd be kind of nice
Good.
to see a different part of the state, a different federation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have the meetings down, so we'll revisit who, or we have the meeting dates down, so we'll revisit who's attending what next time when we have a little bit better idea, and then even at the following meeting, perhaps. So, is there any public comment on any matter that has not been contained in this agenda and that's within the jurisdiction of the State Library Commission?
You have that memorized?
No.
Huh?
You have that memorized?
Well, I mean, I've read it before. Was I close?
Oh, I think it's fabulous.
Okay.
I'd like to thank the chair for her very able leading of a difficult meeting.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thanks, guys. Do we have any other business or announcements?
Party?
We do. We're going to have a party next.
Where?
I don't. Right here. I thought Marla's
Send out
was
a
getting
message.
snacks.
Yeah.
Marla's is doing things while we're working to make things happen.
Yeah.
Multitasking.
More cookies?
I think there'll be cookies.
There's cookies and yes.
Cakes and cheese trees.
I have to say,
meat
I've
and
eaten all the
cheese.
cookies I deserve for the next week.
Mhm.
That was a huge cookie.
But healthy.
Fruit Harvest does things big.
You think that was healthy? Good.
So healthy. Yeah.
Look at you bloom.
I have so bloomed. Air how the bruise is blooming.
You guys ready for the message?
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here for this was a lengthy meeting, and now we have a reception, and hopefully we can enjoy spending a little bit of time with the staff. And I appreciate you all for your comments and guidance throughout this particular meeting. And so we're adjourned, and enjoy the reception.
I think we have an incredible